Hello, everyone. Welcome to Anatomy and Physiology 606. We're not a lab course, so if you're a pre-nursing student, it's probably not the one for you. But if you're not, then you're probably in the right place. Um, we'll start with taking a look at the Blackboard. If you click on Blackboard, then click on our course, you'll see a screen that has a nice long black line on the left, which has lots of information on it for you. And I'm going to go down that with you now. First, there'll be announcements, and the announcements will be there frequently, especially about quizzes and when things are due, and how to even hand them in, and how to do it. There's a little bit about my background in there that you can read on your own, and then there's Collaborate, which is the way we're going to talk to each other, hopefully on a weekly basis on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. And go through the slides and the information you need for this course. Then we have the syllabus. The syllabus is available to you right there on Blackboard. All you have to do is click it and bring it up on your screen, and you can print it on your at home if you wish. The syllabus has lots of information on it. It has the course description. It has the grading situation where you have to take, you're going to be taking 4 quizzes, 15 points each. On the syllabus, it'll tell you what the dates are for those quizzes, and I'll talk to you a little more about that later on. The first quiz isn't for a few weeks, so more information will come. There are assignments. The assignments will be handed in through the assignment section of Blackboard. Again, I'll show you how to do that if you don't know how. The first one isn't due until during the week next week, so we don't have to do anything for that this week, and I'll tell you more about that. The quizzes will be, the first one is during the week of the 21st of September, and you'll be able to take that quiz anytime during that week. It'll be a timed quiz. You take it online, and then the information is automatically graded and sent to me. It'll be on your grade sheet. You can click on My Grades and see how you did. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about the assignments. Now, the assignments are on Blackboard, right there on the black panel on the left. If you click on that, you'll see them. And each one, you would just set up the assignment section on Blackboard. Again, I'll show you how. And then you just type in your answers. There's only a few answers each week. They will actually be counted all together once you get them all in for the entire course as your final exam. So in a sense, it's a take-home final. You can answer those questions with any information you have available. You don't have to not have no books open or anything like that. And then just hand them to me, and I'll keep track of them. And at the end, we'll use that as your 20% final exam grade. So there's no final. Another thing you want to know is that there's no textbook to buy. I wrote the textbook for this course for me and you. It's called the Survival Guide Text, and it's also on Blackboard. All you have to do is click on Survival Guide Text, and it'll appear up on your screen. You can print sections of it weekly if you want to, or just read it off your screen. There are readings on the syllabus for you to do each week, so you can keep up to date on what's going on. After that, we have the slides. The slides are there for every single week that we have. The first one is called Introduction Slides. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on Share My Screen and see if I can get that one to appear on your screen. And we'll go through the slides together for the first week sort of classroom session. These are the slides that you'll actually see on your screen in the classroom, if you're there. Now, there they are. This one says Anatomy and Physiology of the Human Body. Notice that there's 4 words there: anatomy, physiology, cytology, and histology. Anatomy is the study of structure, I'm sorry. For example, if you are interested in the eye, an anatomist would want to know what all the parts of the eye are and what they're called. A physiologist would be interested in how the eye actually sees and how it allows you to focus and do all the things that the eye actually does. Cytology is the study of cells, because our body is actually made up of cells, trillions of them, and each one of them is individually alive. One question you can almost ask yourself is, am I alive? And the answer is probably no. The answer is your cells are alive as individuals, and they live together inside of you and work as a team to make you exist. Histology is the study of tissues. And again, we'll have a class on that in a few weeks. Next slide is the levels of organization and how the human body is actually put together. You're actually made of chemicals. Obviously, you know that. Very few atoms make up the human body. It's just simple ones like hydrogen and nitrogen and sodium and some fancy ones, but very few like magnesium and zinc are in there, and a lot of hydrogen, a lot of oxygen, carbon, obviously. But when you put those atoms together, they can join together and form chemical bonds with each other. And when they do, they create molecules. And molecules have their own properties. So if you put that together, some carbon and some hydrogen and some oxygen, you can actually make sugar, a sugar molecule like glucose. You can make DNA if you add some nitrogen and phosphorus to it. You can make proteins. You can make even just ordinary water just by linking oxygen and hydrogen together. So we are made of these various chemicals, mostly proteins, carbohydrates, fats, oils, DNA, RNA, water. And when they work together as teams, these molecules can actually create little cell parts that actually have functions. And the cell parts, when they work together, they become cells. And that's where life starts. The cells in your body are what actually are alive. They're individual living things. They have a lifespan. They get born inside your body, and then they die in there and get replaced by new ones. Many cells in your brain, however, are the ones that you was born with. The brain doesn't really replace its nerve cells. When cells work together as teams, you create tissues. You don't want just one cell in your muscle to pick up your arm. It just wouldn't be enough power. So many cells work together to create a tissue, a muscle tissue. And that muscle tissue, the cells work all together, and they have enough power to lift up your arm. There are 4 kinds of tissues in your body. You have muscle tissue, you have nervous tissue. You don't want one nerve cell in your brain. They work together as teams. You have epithelium tissue, which is your covering, that's just like your skin, and it covers and lines your stomach and things like that too. And we'll talk about that. And of course, there's connective tissue that holds you all together. So tissues are made of cells, but tissues aren't the where you stop either. If you take some those 4 tissues, nervous tissue, muscle tissue, connective tissue, epithelium tissue, and you work them together as teams, you can create a stomach. You can create an esophagus. You can create an intestine. You can create a heart. You can create a lung. You can create a kidney. And those are your organs. They're made of tissues. And then your organs aren't the only, you can't be just one organ. So organs work together as teams too. And so you have organ systems. All the organs, for example, that work together to be doing digestion would be your digestive system. That's your stomach, your esophagus, and your small and large intestine, and even some help from the pancreas and the liver. And then you have the systems working together, and that finally becomes you, the organism. So you're an organism, and you're made of 11 systems, which are in turn made of organs, which are in turn made of tissues, which are in turn made of cells, and which are in turn just made of various chemicals. So you're just very complex, coordinated chemicals. And that's what happens when you put things together the right way. You create an organism. Next slide shows you a list of the systems. All of them obviously have to work to keep you alive. The only one that really isn't necessary for absolute life is the reproductive system, because that's the one that you just use to make the next generation. But all the rest of them are, they have to work perfectly together as a giant team to become you, to make you work the way you do. You can take a look at those on your own, what they are. Just make sure you know what your 11 systems are. Now, when you talk about the human body, you are, especially people in the medical field, they have terms for things. And these are what they call directional terms. For example, if you look at that little person there that's in the drawing, you see there are terms. I'm going to put my glasses on here so I can see them myself. Like superior and inferior. Superior just means above something, like your head is superior to your chest. Posterior means the back of something. It's also the word dorsal goes with that. Anterior means the front of something, so that's your ventral side, your tummy. Lateral means to the side, so your ears obviously are lateral on your head. Distal means further away from the midline of your body, and proximal means closer to it. So you can say that your wrist is closer to your midline than your fingers, so you can say the wrist is proximal and the fingers are distal. But you can say the elbow is proximal to the wrist because it's closer to the midline. It just means closer or further away from the middle of your body. Parietal and visceral, anything that's parietal means around the outside of something. And we'll talk about that later on when we have a diagram. Visceral means anything that's to do with touching or part of your internal organs. In fact, way back in the Middle Ages, they used to eviscerate if they didn't like what you did, if the king didn't like what you did. And that was basically taking out your internal organs while you were still alive. External, just as obvious, that's toward the surface. An external or superficial thing would be like a scratch on your skin. And internal is deeper. Central means just, again, the center of something, like the pupil in your eye is central to it. It's in the middle. And peripheral means away from the center or toward the side again. So those are some directional terms. Now, what I did for you is I listed them here on the next slide for you to make it more clear to understand. Anterior, if somebody says that something is anterior in the medical field, they mean it's toward the front of the body when the person is standing in that position. These directional terms do not refer to anything except standing up. If you're upside down, your head is underneath you, but it's still superior to your chest because these don't only refer to the standing up position. Anterior and ventral are synonyms. They mean the same thing, toward the front. Posterior and dorsal, those are also synonyms. They mean toward the back. So your backbone is dorsal, your back is your dorsal side, your tummy is your ventral side, and it's also your anterior. Superior just means above something. We won't use the word cephalad at all. It's just there to be a synonym for it. It just simply means toward the head. So it means above. So you can say that for example, your heart is superior to your intestines because they're above it when you're standing up. Inferior means just the opposite, underneath something. So you have, for example, a superior vena cava, which is a giant vein above your heart, and you have an inferior vena cava, which is a giant vein below your heart. Medial means toward the middle of something. That's obvious. Your belly button is medial. Lateral is toward the side. Means your kidneys are lateral. Your ears are lateral. Parietal, again, means around the outside of something. And again, that'll be more clear a little bit later on. And visceral means something to do with your organs, like we said. External, superficial, toward the surface. Internal, deep, away from the surface. Proximal means usually have to do with your arms and legs. If it's closer to the attachment of the arm or the leg to the body than something else, we say that it's proximal. If it's distal, it's further away. So your wrist is distal to your elbow because it's further away from your body than the elbow is. Central is obvious, near the center of something, and peripheral, again, away from the center. So those are just terms that are used very often in the medical field about talking about where the parts of the body are. Now, speaking of the parts of the body, one of the things we need to know in this lecture is what they call various sections of the body. If you work in an office or in any kind of medical field, imaging, whatever it might be, they're going to use these words every day, and you're going to need to know what they are. So there they are on the actual diagrams. But what I did for you is I listed them on the next few slides so we can go over them one at a time. The major body regions. Now, your head and neck. If somebody comes in and a doctor says he has a cephalic injury, you should know instantly that means he has a head injury. Cephal means head. Cervical is your neck injury. So if he has a cervical injury, that means it could be very serious. He could have broken his neck in a car accident or whatever. Cranial is the top of your head. That's where your brain is. So if the cranial injury, that means that he might have had a brain damage. And facial is obvious. That means your face. The next one, abdominal, is the region between your lowest ribs and your pelvis. That's your abdomen. The pelvis is the one enclosed by your pelvic bones, which basically is your hips. We'll talk about what's in those areas later on. But sometimes the abdominal region, pelvic region are put together as one big cavity inside your body, and they call that the abdominal pelvic region. The inguinal region is your groin. It's right right between your legs. Very easy to damage the muscles there when you're doing something like sliding into second base or something like that. Lots of athletes have groin injuries in that lower part of their abdomen. The pectoral region is your chest. They call them your pectoral muscles in your chest. And sternal region is right smack in the middle of your chest. That bone that's really hard in front of your heart there is called your sternum. And so we call that the sternal region. It's protecting your heart. The posterior trunk means your back side, and the dorsum is the back of your chest, literally your back. Gluteal means your butt. Those muscles in your buttocks are called the gluteus maximus and gluteus minimus and gluteus medius, and they are all the ones that you're sitting on. The reason that humans have large gluteal muscles is so that they can help them stand upright and walk upright without using their arms to help them walk like gorillas do. The lumbar region is your lower back, where your lower lumbar vertebrae are, right above your butt. And the sacral region is that hard bone area right above your butt. That's right at the bottom of your vertebral column. And we'll look at that when we see some bones later on in the course. In fact, that bone down there is actually called your sacrum. And vertebral is the region that's right over your backbone where your vertebrae are. Now, if you say the axillary region of your body is your armpits. And in fact, knowing these words helps because the artery that's in there and also the vein are called axillary. You have the axillary artery that goes from your chest into your arms, right at your armpit. The word coxal always refers to your hips. Obviously, genital is the external reproductive organs. We know that word. And perineal is the region between your anus and your reproductive organs, right between your legs. If you have a little baby boy and you change his diaper, you can probably see a line there right in the perianal region between his legs. And that would have been basically his closed up vagina, because most or all actual embryos start out as girls. And then they, if you have the Y chromosome as a boy, that closes up and, all the boy organs start to form instead. And then you have the arms. Your forearm is your antebrachial region. Anti means in front of. So it's in front of your brachial region. The brachial region is your upper arm. So obviously the forearm is antebrachial. Antecubital is the front of your elbow, that little place where your arm folds up. And it's where the person takes blood from the vein there if you go to get blood taken. Cubital is your elbow, because it looks like a little cube. Brachial is your upper arm. That's the one they do blood pressure on for you. The carpal is your wrist, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of carpal tunnel syndrome, which is where your hand goes asleep because the blood is not going properly into your hand from your arm. That's called carpal tunnel, and that's to do with your wrist. Digital is your fingers. The pollex is your thumb, and the palm is palmar obviously is your palm. The word crural refers to your entire leg. Digital are your toes. Now, the femoral region is your thigh. It's a very big bone in there. It's called a femur, named for the region. And it's your thigh bone. The patella is your kneecap. And so the front of your knee would be your patella region. Popliteal is the back of your knee, where your leg folds, and pedal is your foot, and planar, and sometimes it's plantar, is the bottom of your foot, the sole of your foot. In fact, some people get warts down there, and they call them planar or plantar warts. The hallux is your big toe. And then we get to the next one, where we talk a little bit about the way things are cut. And the reason for that is because when you have an organ like the heart or the brain, and you're looking at the parts of it, and you're interested in the anatomy of it, it depends on how it was cut, on what you're really seeing, because it's not, completely even. So if you have a brain, and you cut it from top to bottom, right down the middle, you get a right and left side, and that's called a sagittal section. And if it's right down the middle, it's a mid-sagittal section. If it's a little off to the side, then it would be a sagittal section, up and down, right down the middle. So you get two sides when you're done. If you cut the brain in half across itself, then that would be a transverse section. And if you look at it, look at what you cut, you would see it totally differently. It would almost look like a totally different organ. It totally depends on how it was cut. And if you cut it side to side, you'd get a front and back section. And that little sort of rectangle around that poor little guy there is going to cut him side to side. You're going to end up with a front or an anterior and a back, a posterior section of him. And that's a coronal section or a frontal section. So when you look at an organ that's been cut and a picture was taken of it or whatever, that you really have to know how it was cut. Was it a transverse section? Was it a sagittal section or a coronal section? To get a full understanding of what you look at. Then we get to the cavities in your body. Now, your body is hollow, and the organs live in those hollow spaces. You have a ventral cavity. That's the largest one in your body, and that's that blue area in there. And that's broken up into three parts. And the thoracic cavity, because thoracic also means chest, your thoracic cavity is where your heart and lungs are, and your ribs. Below that is your diaphragm, which is used to breathe with. And then underneath that is your abdominal cavity, which has your stomach and liver and pancreas and, mostly your small and large intestine in there. And your spleen, lots of other organs are living in the abdominal cavity. And then below that is your pelvic cavity. Now, there's no boundary really between the abdominal cavity and the ventral cavity. It's just sort of an imaginary line where your hips are. And in the pelvic cavity, that would be your internal reproductive organs and your bladder and things like that. The dorsal cavity is much smaller and is completely surrounded by bone, because what's in that cavity is so serious. It needs to be protected very well. The cranial cavity in your head, that's the one that contains your brain. And it's also, the inside of your skull. And then the spinal cavity is the spaces in the vertebrae of your backbone that the spinal cord goes through. And the vertebrae, of course, protect the spinal cord. That's the dorsal cavity, because that's toward the back of your body. So you have a dorsal cavity with brain and spinal cord in it, and you have a ventral cavity, which is thoracic, abdominal, pelvic, which contains all the organs on that side. Now, some of the body cavities, what are in these things? Well, the dorsal one, the cranial one, as I said, houses your brain. The spinal one houses your spinal cord. The ventral one is thoracic first, that's up in your chest. And that's the one that houses your hearts and lungs, and also your esophagus and your trachea that leads down to your stomach and your lungs. The abdominal pelvic cavity, the abdominal section of that houses your stomach, intestines, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, spleen, kidneys, all those things. And then the pelvic cavity under that would have your bladder, the rectum, and it doesn't say it in the slide because it didn't get the whole thing, but down under there it says also your external reproductive organs as well. That's where your uterus would be and your bladder and things like that. The heart now, it's right in between your two lungs. It's right smack in the middle. The space between your two lungs that your heart is in is known as the mediastinum. and your heart is surrounded by two membranes. And here we can talk about parietal and visceral again. One membrane is like kind of like a plastic bag. These membranes are very, very tough. These are like saran wrap or plastic wrap. It's not a weak membrane. You take a big plastic bag or a big membrane, you put the heart in it. And then you take that plastic bag with the heart in it and put it in a bigger plastic bag. So you have the heart in two plastic bags. The one that's actually touching the heart, because the heart is an organ, they call it visceral pericardium. Pericardium simply means around the heart, and it's the membrane that's actually touching the heart. And then the second plastic bag, or the second membrane, is further out. It's more toward the outside, and that's called a parietal pericardium. In between the two of them is a thick, oily fluid. And it's very, very important that you have two membranes like that with fluid in between them. Parietal pericardium on the outside, visceral pericardium touching the heart. And the fluid acts as a cushion. So when the heart is actually beating, it doesn't beat up against the sternum bone or other parts of the chest and wear itself out. It's actually there, the liquid is a cushion that it pushes against, almost like a liquid pillow. And it makes the heart stay alive, for 70, 80 years, which is pretty amazing. There it is. There's the mediastinum, and there's your heart. Now, this diagram doesn't show the membranes. The next one will. And you can see the two lungs on either side. And coming down is the trachea. And you can't see it in here, but the esophagus would be down in there too. In the mediastinum, that's the area between the lungs. Now, this diagram is really nice. It shows you, I'm going to see if I can use my finger here. Here we go. It shows you that there's your lung right here. See? And then there's two lines. There's a white line and another white line. That is the outside membrane around the lung, and this is the inside membrane. The outside membrane is parietal, and they call that, these membranes around the lung are called the pleural membranes, because pleura means lungs. And so you have the parietal pleura, the outer one here, and you have the visceral pleura, the one that's actually touching the lung, here. And in between the two of this black stuff, that's that thick, oily fluid again. So when the lungs are breathing, it's a cushion, and it helps to, when the ribs expand, it helps to, to draw the air into the lungs. If you got stabbed, then this fluid would have air in it. And if it had air in it, if the rib cage expanded to try and breathe, the air would expand too, and the lung would not expand with it. And that would be called a collapsed lung. So this fluid has to stay in here. This is the serous fluid, and it's in between the parietal and visceral pleura, these guys. Now, in this diagram, they're calling it pulmonary and costal, but we're going to call it parietal and visceral. And you see, if you go around the heart now, you see the same thing. You have two membranes, an outer one and an inner one, and the heart is pushing against that as it beats. The outer one is the parietal pericardium, and the inner one is the visceral pericardium. And the liquid in there, that serous liquid fluid, that oily serous fluid, is acting as a cushion as the heart beats against it. Here is a diagram of the way your abdomen is kind of put together. And if you look at this one here, there's your backbone. And let's say that's your stomach or something like that, some organ inside. That yellow is a parietal membrane, just like it is on the heart. It's around the edges. Parietal membrane means around the outside. And what it does, it goes to the backbone, then comes forward and wraps around the organ. And then it's called a visceral. Now, if it's in the abdomen, instead of calling it pleura or pericardium like you do in the chest, they call it peritoneum. So you have a parietal peritoneum that goes around the outside of the cavity, and then it goes around the organ to hold it in place. Remember, these membranes are tough. They're like plastic wrap. And that's what's holding your stomach in place so it doesn't fall to the bottom of the cavity. The same thing is happening here. It's just holding some more organs together. But you notice that the parietal pericardium here does not go around the kidneys. the kidneys are behind it. And so that's why the kidneys are so easy to damage. All you do, if you hit somebody right there in that right spot, you could actually cause the kidneys to bleed and cause real serious problems. So we could say the kidneys are retroperitoneal. How about that for a word? Behind the peritoneal membrane. These organs here, though, like the stomach, that's the membrane wraps around it. And that's the one that holds everything in place, holds that in place. This is holding the liver in place and your intestine in place. And these are parietal peritoneum and visceral peritoneum. It's all the same membrane. It just wraps around everything, around the outside and then around the organ to hold them all together. Now, last thing for this a quick introduction session is a little bit about physiology. Metabolism is all the biochemistry that your body does, all put together, and it's a lot of stuff. There are diagrams that are literally pages and pages and pages long about all the different chemical reactions that happen in your body every single second to keep you alive. But about half of them are what they call anabolic processes. Anabolic processes are the ones that build things up. They make small things into big things. In other words, you can take amino acids like that you would eat in your food, and you would build and put them together to make proteins. You're building something. It's like building a wall with bricks. If you take glucose molecules like sugar and you put them together, you can make other things like starch and other types of what they call polysaccharides. You can make big molecules from small ones. And whenever you make big molecules from small ones, you call that anabolism. That's why the steroids that people sometimes take and shouldn't to make their muscles get bigger are called anabolic steroids, because they cause your body to make or build more proteins from linking these amino acids together into bigger molecules, which would be the proteins. And so you get bigger muscles. Whenever you build them, though, you use energy. And so anabolism is an energy using process. You would get tired from doing that. Catabolism, on the other hand, is the other half of that. And catabolism is all the chemical reactions that happen in you that break things down instead of building them up. They take the proteins apart, like your stomach digests them. And when it gets into your cells, it breaks them down even further into carbon dioxide, and you breathe it out. You bust them all down. And when you break the food down and other things down in your body, you release the energy that's in them. So anabolism is building things up, building big molecules from small ones, like building DNA and building RNA and building proteins and building carbohydrates and building fats. And catabolism is breaking them down. If you add them two together, all the chemical reactions that are anabolic and all the chemical reactions that are catabolic, anabolism plus catabolism is all your metabolism. It's everything put together. That's what's going on inside of you. Keep you alive. Only a few things left. One word that's very, very seriously important to a physiologist is the word homeostasis. A lot of processes in your body have to be kept at certain levels. They can't be allowed to get too high or too fast. They can't be allowed to get too low or too slow. For example, your body temperature is 98.6 Fahrenheit. It can't vary very much from that and keep you alive. You know that a temperature of 104, 105 could be deadly. A temperature of 96, 95, 94 could also be. You have to keep your temperature within certain limits. And the processes that your body uses, which we won't get into today, but the processes your body uses to do that are called homeostatic processes. Homeostatic means keeping things within limits, making sure the temperature doesn't get too high, temperature doesn't get too low. Your blood glucose levels, the sugar in your blood, can't get too high, and it can't get too low. And you eat different things all the time, lots of sugary things, and maybe someday not a lot of sugary things. But even so, as long as you don't have diabetes, you'll be able to keep your glucose levels within the proper limits. Your body can do that. And again, we'll talk about how it does that later on in the course. Other examples of that would be cholesterol. You can't let it go too high. You can't let it get too low in your blood either. triglycerides in your blood or fatty materials that you don't want to get too high in your blood either. There's lots of them, lots of examples of this that you have to keep within limits to stay alive. That's called homeostasis. Very important physiological thing. And then this one shows you something about how you might control your temperature. This is an example of just a thermostat in your house. If the thermostat is set and your room temperature is, let's say, 70 degrees, if the temperature falls below that, the thermostat turns on the furnace and makes it go back up to 70. If it goes too high, the thermostat will turn off the furnace and your house will cool back down to 70. Either way, the thermostat is working with the heater, is causing the temperature in your house not to get too hot and not to get too cold. Again, that's homeostasis. And when you do it this way, it's called negative feedback, where you're controlling the making sure it doesn't get too high, making sure it doesn't get too low with, in this case, the thermostat. Now, inside your body, you have ways of doing that with your glucose level, with your temperature, with your cholesterol, and other things. That's negative feedback. And the last we have here is positive feedback. That's when your body does things in one direction and keeps doing it until something happens. For example, if you are a girl, your ovary makes an egg every single month, and it literally has to explode out of the ovary. There's no hole in the ovary for the egg to come out. It literally explodes out. And so what happens for about the first 14 days after your last period is there's a thing in your ovary called a follicle. And what it does is it keeps expanding like a balloon, bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and keeps doing that until it just can't do it anymore and it explodes, just like the balloon would do, and out comes the egg. And they call that ovulation. So if something that's happening like that, where it just keeps going and going until something dramatic happens, then that's positive feedback. If you're just keeping things within limits, that's negative feedback. Well, that's the lesson for today. I hope that you can get this recording. I will send you a email or an announcement to show you how to get the recording so you could read it and see it yourself. There still will be a class tonight at 6 o'clock. If you miss it, you can use this as the recording for it. Also, if you did attend the class, you could actually have the recording available to re-see it if you wish. All right, have a good night, and I will see you later tonight or next week. Bye now.